Our next speaker is Dr. Teresa Davis, and I'd like to make a few comments about Teresa. She's professor of pediatrics at the Children's Nutrition Research Center at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. She earned her PhD degree at the University of Tennessee and did postdoctoral research at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. She's highly recognized for research on nutritional regulation of protein metabolism and growth in infants, children, and farm animals. Currently, she's editor-in-chief of the Journal of Nutrition and editorial board member of the Journal of Animal Science. She's past president of the American Society for Nutrition. She's been honored for research excellence by the American Society of Nutrition, the American Society of Animal Science, and the University of Tennessee, her alma mater. She's currently a member of the board of directors of the American Society of Animal Science. She's an animal scientist within the medical community, is one way of describing her. So that makes her well qualified to talk on the topic, animal nutrition research opportunities to improve human health. Welcome to Dr. Teresa Davis.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've worked for many years with Don in the American Society for Nutrition and the American Society of Animal Science, and I've learned that when Don asks you to do something, you really just can't say no. So here I am. So let's see. Here's where we move the slides, right? Okay. So according to a recent UN report, the world's population is projected to grow from its current 7.2 billion to about 9.5 billion by the year 2050, and then on up to about 11 billion by the year 2100. So this increase in the world's population is going to place increased demand for agriculture, and particularly an increased demand for animal source foods in the diet. But can we meet this demand for animal source foods? Well, over the past 50 years, there has been an increase in meat production that has really quadrupled in this past 50 years. And this has been primarily due to an increase in the production of swine and poultry, which are highly efficient utilizers of protein. So in the next 40 years, up to the year 2050, it's projected that the global consumption of meat and dairy products will increase by 75%. And a lot of that drive in the increase in the consumption of meat and dairy products is going to come from the developing world, where there's not only an increase in population, but also an increase in the number of the middle class as their economies grow. So there's going to be a really increased demand for animal source foods in the diet. Now, I think it's important to point out, particularly with the recent recommendations of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, that animal source foods are really important for a healthy diet. As we all know, animal source foods contain high quality protein that has that balanced mixture of amino acids that's needed to promote growth and health and vigor. Animal source foods contain not only high protein that has that nice balanced mixture of amino acids, but they're also rich in a number of other nutrients like readily bioavailable iron and zinc, vitamin B12, selenium, phosphorus, and potassium. And I think it's also important to point out that the fat content of meat today is much less than what it was, say, 50 years ago. So if you're eating a sirloin steak today, that fat content is 35% less than it was in the 1980s. Also important is that lean meat has less calories than many plant protein sources to provide that 25 grams of protein that is needed at each meal in order to optimize the synthesis of protein. And I think we all are pretty much aware that high protein diets promote satiety. thereby reducing excess consumption of calories. And so that's really important today with our obesity epidemic. Now, if we turn our attention to improving maternal, infant, and child nutrition, the UN has set forth some global targets to improve infant and child nutrition. So we need to reduce the number of children who are stunted. We need to reduce the number of childbearing women who are anemic. And we need to reduce the number of low birth weight infants. Now, sometimes we think of low birth weight infants being a really big problem in the developing countries, but it's a big problem here in the United States. 10% of infants that are born in this country are of low birth weight, and that has great implications on their health, not only at the time that they're born and soon afterwards, but also implications on their health long-term in adulthood. We also need to reduce childhood wasting. So for each one of these issues, animal source foods plays an important role in addressing each one of these concerns. For example, animal source foods have been shown to improve linear growth of weaned children. Another example is that iron is high in animal source foods, and it's more bioavailable from animal source foods than plants. There's also studies to suggest that animal source foods promotes the recovery of malnourished children. So there's a number of ways that animal source foods can address these issues that are a global concern for maternal, infant, and childhood nutrition. So, how can nutrition research using domestic animals, how can this improve human health? Well, the primary government agency that is tasked with improving human health is the National Institutes of Health. And so, as we know, its primary mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature of living things and to apply this knowledge to improve health. It has a budget of a little over $30 billion, and most of that research is targeted for extramural research that's allocated through the different institutes and centers. However, there's been a 20% decline in funding from the National Institutes of Health in the past few years if we consider inflation in that factor. So there's actually been a decline in how much research you could conduct with those dollars. Now, as we all know, domestic animal species are great models for human nutrition and actually are in many ways better models than rodents. But yet, 98% of the dollars that's spent by NIH for animal research actually goes to rodent studies. And very few studies are actually conducted in domestic animal species. I have some numbers here for 2007, that's the most recent I have. But even if this figure doubled in the amount of research that's conducted and supported by NIH with domestic animal species, that's still a drop in the bucket. So I'm going to give you an example of studies that were supported or are supported by the National Institutes of Health using a domestic animal species. So the neonatal pig is a really great model for the human infant because the neonatal pig has a similar anatomy and metabolism to the human infant. Its body size is large enough that you can you have a number of experimental approaches that are available to you. And as I alluded to previously, low birth weight infants are a major concern for health care. Most of these infants are not just born small, but they're small when they're discharged from the hospital. They're actually less than the 10th percentile from interuterine growth standards, and they remain small as adults. And many of them exhibit adverse long-term developmental outcomes like insulin resistance, increased adiposity, cognitive deficits, reduced work capacity. So anything that we can do to improve the nutritional management of these low birth weight infants would be a great advantage. So in some NIH-sponsored basic research that we have conducted using the neonatal piglet model, we identified intracellular signaling components that regulate protein synthesis in response to a meal in the neonate. Well, that's all fine and good, but how can we use this information to improve the health of the human neonate? So I don't expect you to look at all this data really carefully, but what this data is showing us is that from this NIH-sponsored research, we showed that it's that pulsatile rise in insulin in the blood and the pulsatile rise in amino acids in the blood that then triggers these intracellular signaling pathways within the cell to turn on protein synthesis. And furthermore, we showed that when that happens with regular meal feeding, that will enhance growth. And that's really important because most babies of low birth weight in hospital are fed continuously by parenteral nutrition through an IV, or they may be fed through an orogastric tube continuously. So we know that the pattern at which that food is delivered, even if it's the same exact amount of food, can affect their growth. So you can see a marked increase in lean mass when they're meal fed as compared to continuously fed. And I think that has important implications for animal production as well, because this shows that the pattern or the timing at which the food is delivered can impact their growth. So this is an example of where domestic animal model has been critical for nutrition research. There are many other examples, like the pig has been used for obesity research and adipose tissue development. The sheep has been a wonderful model to look at the impacts of maternal nutrition on developmental programming. And cattle has been used quite extensively to look at the regulation of fat synthesis and also lactation biology. But I have to say, many of the important discoveries that have been made in animal nutrition have been supported by the USDA. So the USDA's principal intramural scientific research agency is the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And as we know, its mission is to conduct research to develop solutions for agricultural problems of high national priority. And that is to ensure that we have a high quality, safe food supply, that we know and can assess the nutritional needs of Americans, sustain a competitive agricultural economy, enhance the natural resource base, and provide economic opportunities for our citizens. Now, in contrast to the $30 billion that's awarded to NIH, the USDA, this component of the USDA, the Intramural Scientific Research Agency, is awarded a little over $1 billion. So we have 4 national programs within the ARS. Some of these include nutrition, for example, nutrition, food safety and quality, and animal production and protection. So I have to really highlight, when we're talking about human nutrition research, the ARS Human Nutrition Research Centers. The mission of these centers is to define the role of food and its components in optimizing health throughout the life cycle for all Americans by conducting high national priority research. There are 6 now, human nutrition research centers. They focus on different aspects of nutrition. The Children's Nutrition Research Center at Baylor College of Medicine, where I work, has really been internationally recognized for their work in the neonatal piglet model. The Human Nutrition Research Centers, like much of research, has been flat funded for the past 10 years, and so when you factor in inflation, that means the amount of dollars that you have to conduct research is going down. So I'd like to highlight some of the studies that's been conducted at this center. One of the primary labs that uses a neonatal pig as an animal model is the laboratory of Doug Burren. So one of the studies that Doug has conducted has looked at the role of nutrition in liver disease in infants. because about 20% of infants that are in the neonatal intensive care unit develop this parenteral nutrition-associated liver disease. And the development of this disease increases the longer they're on parenteral nutrition. So this disease is characterized by high bilirubin, elevated liver enzymes, fatty liver, cholestasis, and so forth. So Doug has looked at the effect of these different lipid emulsions on the development of the liver disease. And he has compared the response to soybean oil, which is high in the N6-PUFAs, with the response to fish oil, which is high in the N3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then a mixture of different lipids, soybean oil, medium-chain triglycerides, olive oil, fish oil. But only one of these emulsions is approved by the FDA, and that's intralipid, which is, contains the N6-PUFAs. So in studies that he conducted at the Children's Nutrition Research Center, his study showed that soybean-based lipid emulsions, which is the only one that's currently approved by the FDA, is really not optimal for liver functions because, as you can see, it produces a high bilirubin, increases bile acids, causes fatty liver, increases inflammation, and so forth. But these lipid emulsions that are not approved by the FDA yet can prevent liver disease. So this is very important work and has important implications in nutrition. So the extramural scientific research agency for the USDA, as we know, is the AFRI, or Agriculture and Food Research Initiative at the National Institutes of Food and Agriculture. So the mission of AFRI is to advance ag research, extension, and education. We have a budget of a little over $300 million. So we have 8 challenge areas. Some of these encompass nutrition-related issues like childhood obesity and prevention. I'd also like to point out that the foundation programs has about 7 target or focus areas. One of those is animal health and production, and under that is animal nutrition, growth, and lactation. So this is a recent study I thought I would show from the laboratory of Guao Wu at Texas A&M that was supported by the USDA NEFA. And this was a very important study because it showed that supplementation with an amino acid, arginine, during early gestation can reduce embryonic mortality in swine quite substantially. And this is really important work because embryonic loss is a very important issue in reproduction, not just of swine, but of humans as well. So I think this is really an outstanding study, an example of some of the work that's supported by NEFA. So what opportunities exist today to currently improve human and animal health using nutrition research? In recognition of the importance of domestic animal species to improve biomedicine and agriculture, the dual purpose with dual benefit program was developed by the NIH and the USDA. I think these agencies are to be congratulated for cooperating and supporting research to improve biomedicine and agriculture. So the purpose of this program is to support research in agriculturally important domestic species to improve farm animal production, but also human health as well. And so the studies that are supported by this have to be relevant to both animal agriculture and to biomedicine. So there are 4 target areas. One is assisted reproduction and stem cell biology. Another is metabolism and as related to obesity and nutrition. Another is the developmental origins of adult disease. And then another one is infectious disease. So here's a list of some of the grants that's been supported. To my knowledge, about 17 grants have been supported by the USDA, NEFA, and NIH dual purpose with dual benefit program. You can see that there are studies in the different domestic animal species. A lot of these studies that are supported are in infectious disease and reproduction. A little bit has been supported by nutrition. So I'll give you an example of one that is in nutrition. So we have some studies that were initially supported by NIH, which suggested that supplementation with the amino acid leucine can stimulate protein synthesis. And it did so whether the leucine was provided parenterally by infusion or whether it was provided enterally through a formula. And furthermore, we showed that when the leucine was provided parenterally by IV, that you could increase lean growth. Now this is really important, not just increase body weight, but you increase lean growth. So that's important, I think, for maintenance of muscle and growth of muscle in the infant, but also has relevance to animal production and meat production. And it increased lean growth by increasing the activation of the signaling pathway that stimulates protein synthesis. So with this sort of background, we applied to the USDA NIFA and NIH program on dual purpose with dual benefit. And our preliminary studies suggest that when you supplement leucine enterally, that you increase protein synthesis, and that has the potential to increase muscle mass. So we've talked a little bit throughout the morning about some priorities for nutrition research. So I've just listed some here that come to mind. There's a number of areas where more research is needed that is very critical for nutrition and development. Okay, the first one that I have listed here is to define the mechanisms by which nutrition impacts normal growth and development. I've talked a little bit this morning about some studies that have been conducted, but we need much more. There's a lot of concerns, for example, in the neonates who are born of low birth weight or premature. But you know, in animal production, about 10% of the piglets that are born are low birth weight or runt pigs too. So, and that's a major loss for animal production. So anything that we can do to improve the efficiency of growth will be important for human health and animal production. It's important that we understand how nutrition during critical periods of development impacts future health. So this is a really hot area right now. Nutrition, a number of studies have shown that nutrition during early life can impact not only the later health of that person, but also their offspring later on. So we need to understand this much, much more. Several people have touched on today the importance of understanding the role of the microbiome in the metabolic response to diet, and also how the microbiome is influenced by diet and the environment. We need to understand the mechanisms by which nutrition impacts cognitive function, immune function, skeletal function, and muscle function. You know, we talk a lot about dietary requirements. What are the nutrient requirements? But then we have to say, requirement for what? Is the protein requirement just for nitrogen balance? Or is it for muscle function? Is it for prevention of sarcopenia? What are the outcomes that we're really looking at? And then the last one that I've listed here is to understand the evolution of obesity and to identify strategies to prevent and to treat obesity. And I think this is really an important issue in our obesity epidemic today. So just to put a few editorial comments here at the end, I think some people in this room may agree that nutrition research in domestic species is at risk due to inadequate funding. We're appreciative of the funding we have very much now, but we'd like more. And I have to say, particularly with NIH, that there's a disproportionate emphasis on rodent models. So I think the dual purpose for dual benefit program, frankly, helps educate NIH about the importance of domestic animal species. So it's important to increase our investment in nutrition research in domestic animals to improve agriculture and also to improve human health. So, thank you.